Today we're going to learn how to use a number line to help us compare and order either decimal numbers or fraction numbers that are tenths or hundredths. So first, let's review what we know about a number line. Okay, as you move to the right on a number line, what is happening to the numbers? They're getting greater as you move to the right. And as you move in the opposite direction, going to the left, what happens to the numbers? They're getting smaller. Okay, we need to keep that in mind because when you're dealing with decimal numbers, sometimes a number looks much greater than it really is, and it helps to think about where it would actually be placed on a number line in relation to other numbers to help you decide how large that number really is. The other thing we need to look at with a number line is how many equal sections one piece of the number line has been split into. So for instance, this section from 0 to 1, okay, we need to look at how many equal parts that section has been split into. So we're not counting the tick marks, the lines, we're counting the spaces between the lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this section has been split into 10 equal parts. What that means is each of these tick marks is 1/10 of that section. Okay, so this number line has been split up to help us record tenths. So let's have a look at our mixed number that you see on the bottom of the page, 1 3/10. Where would we place that on this number line? Well, to begin with, we look at our whole number. Okay, we have 1 whole and 3/10 more. Okay, so that means this number is greater than 1. So I find the 1 on the number line, and then I go 3/10 more. 1, 2, 3. 3/10 more would be there. So this would be 1 and 3/10. It's a number that is greater than 1, but it's between 1 and 2. Okay, so have a look at this number line. Which is greater, A or B? Well, this number line has been set up with what we call benchmarks, which means if this number line only runs from 0 to 1, we know that 1/2 would be right exactly in the middle between 0 and 1. So half is a benchmark. It's a number that we know for certain where it is on the number line, and we know for certain where 0 and 1 are. So they are also benchmarks. Okay, so back to our question, which would be greater, A or B? Well, look at which one is further right. As we go further right on the number line, numbers are getting greater, right? And as we go further left on the number line, numbers are getting smaller. So which one is greater, A or B? Obviously B is greater. It's further right of A. Okay, what about on this number line? Again, this number line is showing us where halfway point is, but which number is greater? Well, which number is further to the right? A. So A is greater than B. Okay, where would you place 3/4 on this number line? Well, 3/4 means that I need to have my number line split into 4 equal parts. Well, if this is half, then I could split each of those sections in half again. And now my number line's been split into 4 equal parts, right? This part, this part, this part, this part, 4 equal parts. So that means this would be 1 of those 4 equal parts. This would be 2 of those 4 equal parts, which simplifies to 1/2, doesn't it? 2/4 is the same thing as 1/2. This would be 3 of those 4 equal parts, and 1 is 4 of those 4 equal parts, right? Which is the same thing as 1. Okay, so let's go back to where would we place 3/4? Well, right there. This number line's been split into hundredths. Okay, so again, this number line goes from 0 to 1, but this time we have 100 sections that from 0 to 1 has been split into. So what that means is this line here is 10 hundredths. This would be 20 hundredths, and so on. 30 hundredths, 40 hundredths. I'm just going to put 50 hundredths, 70 hundredths, because 60 would be in the middle. I just don't want it to get too squishy. 70, this would be 80, this would be 90 hundredths, and this would be 100 hundredths at 1. Okay, so we're going up by hundredths. So where would we place 51 hundredths? Well, if this is 50 hundredths on this line, then 51 hundredths would be right there, wouldn't it? 51 hundredths. Okay, what about 346 thousandths? Remember that this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So this number is 346 thousandths. Well, this, I can think of this in a few different ways, but since my number line is split into hundredths, let's think about how many hundredths are in this number. Well, 34 hundredths plus I have 6 thousandths, don't I? Okay, so that means it's going to be past 34 hundredths by a little bit. Okay, so where would 34 hundredths be? Well, this is 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, 30 hundredths, 40 hundredths. Okay, so 34 hundredths would be, if this is 30 hundredths, so this is 31, 32, 33, 34, and it would be just a hair past that, so it would be right here. That would be 0.346. All right, what about this 2/5? Well, I can think of that as hundredths. How many hundredths would that be? I can use what I know about equivalent fractions to figure that out. What if I had to multiply that 5 by to get 100? 5 times 20, right? So do the same on the top. Multiply by 20. 2 times 20? 40. That's 40 hundredths. Oh, well, that's easy. 10 hundredths, 20 hundredths, 30 hundredths. This must be 40 hundredths. So that means 2/5 is the same thing, or is equivalent to 40 hundredths. So that's where 2/5 goes. Now I can see which number is the smallest and which one is the greatest out of these three numbers, even though some are written as fractions and some are written as decimals. What would be the greatest number? The number that is furthest to the right. So that means 51 hundredths is the greatest number. What would be the smallest number? Well, the number that is furthest to the left. 0.346, or 346 thousandths. 346 thousandths sounds like a pretty big number, but because thousands are much smaller pieces, it's a smaller number. We're going to place these numbers on the number line. Now, is it helpful that this number line has been split into thirds, 3 equal parts? So I have 1/3, 2/3, and this would really be 3/3, which is the same thing as 1. Well, I don't really think so. I prefer to think of it in tenths or hundredths, because if you look at all of these fractions and if you look at all of these decimals, I can see that some of them are in tenths, like this one, and this one, and the others are all in hundredths. So why don't I make equivalent decimals that are all hundredths? And then it will make it easy to know where to place them on the line if they're all hundredths. Okay, so let's do that. Do you remember how to make equivalent decimals? You can just add a 0 onto the end, right? So 1/10 is the same thing as 10 hundredths. Okay, I can show you that as a fraction so you remember how that works. Okay, so this is 1/10, right? This is 10 hundredths. They are equivalent because I've multiplied my denominator, the bottom number, times 10. I've multiplied the top number times 10, right? So they're not different, they are the exact same thing. Okay? So what you need to remember is it's very easy to make equivalent decimals. All you need to do is add a 0 onto the end. Okay? So now we have 10 hundredths. The other one we need to change is this one, which is 4/10. How many hundredths is that? Well, add a 0 on the end. 40 hundredths. Okay, now it should be fairly easy for me to place these on the number line. Instead of thinking of this in thirds and 3 equal groups, I'm going to think of this in hundredths. Okay? So I know if I were thinking of this in hundredths, so I'm going to just kind of just ignore the 1/3 and 2/3 because that's not terribly helpful. I'm going to think of this in hundredths. So then I know right in the middle between 0 and 1 would be halfway. So halfway will be right here. How many hundredths is halfway? 50 hundredths, right? Okay. Let's think of half of that then. What's half of 50 hundredths? 25 hundredths. And halfway between 50 hundredths and 100 hundredths would be 75 hundredths. Right. Okay. I'm going to use those benchmarks instead. Okay. So where would 10 hundredths be? Well, it's halfway between 0 hundredths and 25 hundredths would be 12.5 hundredths. So this is 10 hundredths. It's going to be just a little shy of halfway. So that's 10 hundredths. Okay. What about 0.25? Oh, that's right here. What about 0.35? Well, it's between 25 hundredths and 50 hundredths. It's going to be just a little less than half, so maybe just right there. That's 0.35, which is 35 hundredths. What about 40 hundredths? Well, it'd be right about there. 55 hundredths? Oh, it's going to be right about there. 65 hundredths? Probably about there. And 75 hundredths is right there. Okay. Now I can see which is the greatest number. Well, it's the one furthest to the right. So 75 hundredths is the greatest number. What is the smallest number? 10 hundredths, the furthest left. Right.